brings out another sense, because you have these forces in man, these aspiring souls, which through this inner sacrifice are trying to increase the possessions of cows and knowledge. This knowledge is now stolen by these darker forces, or forces which are trying to prevent man from reaching his higher goal. So you have the different, what is again fascinating is the different terminologies that they use for them, which are very specific to the different characteristics of these forces which function in us. So you have these dasyus which are dividing man, panis which are bargaining, and they hide the cows in caves. Now these caves are the darker parts in us which we are unaware of. So the good news in that is that these cows are not lost, they're all there, but we need to fight and you need to get it back. So these Angirasa rishis want their cows back. So the aspiring element in man wants their cows back. How do they get it back? They have to do the sacrifice. They have to light Agni, or fire, the will. Once they have kindled the fire in them, they invoke Indra. Indra represents the illumined mind. So with your will, you invoke the illumined mind. The illumined mind comes and drinks the Soma wine, or that delight. Because before going into any battle, if you don't have this fearlessness that comes from delight, you're in trouble. So he drinks this wine, goes into the caves. Now there is this person, the divine hound called Sarama. Sarama is a divine hound and symbolically represents intuition. So she is that aspect in man which can tell you where to go, which knows where the problem lies. But she won't be able to reason. So that's the common thing between a dog and intuition, that both can lead you to your goal without having to reason out how they get there. Okay. So Sarama goes there, then that dialogue happens. So we recognize that dialogue even in ourselves, that you know where things are wrong, and there is this dialoguing, and then you either choose to side with the panis and the other negative forces, or you can choose to come back and report. Now, one interesting function of the dasyus is that everything was in a way contributing to that final goal of man. So the dasyus also are described as, their office is to disturb that which is established in order to push man below, or to give him an opportunity of rising higher by breaking that which was good and harmonious in itself, but imperfect, and in any case to render him dissatisfied with anything short of perfection and drive him continually towards the infinite. So that was their role. Although they look like villains, they are actually very beneficial villains in a sense. Now, yeah. So we have seen this deeper symbolic sense of the Vedas, but these are very fundamental questions that one can ask. That is this story relevant to ordinary man in the modern world? Again, and will it help an individual understand himself better, offer solutions for the psychological dilemmas? So I just took a case study, a random situation, and I tried to see how the story could be implemented in daily life and whether it works. So I took the situation of a scholar, and this scholar is very keen on coming up with very original research work. So he's like an Angirasa Rishi who performs his sacrifice, who gives his time, who gives his energy, who has his will, that fire, he's lighting that fire. And naturally, the more time he devotes to his research work, the more knowledge he gets, the more cows he has in his possession. But unfortunately, this scholar has a lot of other distractions. Being in the academic field, we are all quite experienced with this, that you might want to concentrate on one thing, but there's so many other preoccupations which come in the way. So these other preoccupations start acting like the dasyus in him, because they demand his time. Then he has to start calculating whether I give my time here, what. So those are like the panis. So basically they steal his cows, or that time that he could have devoted to get more knowledge is suddenly now distributed and dissipated to, the cows have got stolen. And they are all, it's not that the knowledge is lost, it's just that for the time being, because circumstances are not favorable or because he's not dedicating enough energy into that, he sort of loses that knowledge and it gets pushed into the caves. But the fact is that he is very keen on continuing with his research work. He's very genuine in his aspiration to find something meaningful. So he performs, the Angirasa Rishis are not sleeping, they want to get the cows back. So they perform a sacrifice. He has to renew his will. And how does he renew his will? By the three things that I said. One is the Ghritam, or that clarity of thought. He has to decide very clearly what he wants. So he has to get that involved. Then the word of truth. He has to acknowledge to himself, at least, where the problem lies. Only then can he start working towards resolving his problem. And anyway, when he does these things, the Indra is invoked, or the illumined mind is invoked. So the mind comes into play. Now when the mind comes into play, he drinks the Soma wine, because now he knows where he wants to go. So that confidence of his goal, the destination is there. So that acts like a kind of Soma wine in his system. Then he knows where the problem is. So that's like Sarama, who discovers where the problem lies, goes into the cave. So that's discovering, being aware of where the problem lies. Then the dialoguing happens, because naturally he is interested in doing these other things, but doing those other things would naturally take away from his ultimate goal. So the dialogue happens, but Sarama, now that's where the decision of the scholar lies. Because if he chooses to go ahead with, being distracted, it's like Sarama is siding with the Panis and that group. The outward consequence of that would be that he would go further and further from his goal and get distracted. But if he says nothing doing, I go back and report to Indra, then he goes back to that, to his mind. So then the mind starts playing a very important role, where Indra starts deciding. And the outward result of that would be the fact that he pursues his goal, he puts that as his main priority and goes ahead and gets his cows back. Okay. And then there is the thing of the sun, which is liberated. So the sun again represents truth. But truth, one can understand how sun can represent truth, because just as the sun illuminates the outer world, the sun illuminates the inner world. It gives clarity of vision. So once that truth is released, then it brings light into his own being, and he's able to pursue his studies much better. So to conclude, when we look at ourselves, we see that we are not very consistent individual basically. There are times when you're happy, there are times when you're sad, there are times when you're indifferent, and there's no necessary reason you can attribute it to that. There's no consistency about it. So the question is that, are we in charge of our lives? So if you are in charge of your lives, are we in charge or are we victims? Is there something else which is looking after us? And if you accept that you are victims of certain forces, then do we have a choice in this whole battle? So then the Vedic rishis, through their deeper meditation, saw this vision of the world as a man being the battlefield of these different forces. So you have the whole Angirasa Rishi story, which is happening in different ways in the lives of different people. And there are these forces which are trying to help man reach his perfection. There are these other forces which are trying to deter him from reaching that, and indirectly pushing him, but deterring him on the main front. And the question that again, in what way does this story become very meaningful, or why is it that the Vedic deeper symbolism becomes relevant? Now, if you just stick to the other interpretation of the Vedas, you see that if you give it a socio-historic sense, then it won't be relevant to many of us because we are not involved in that field at all. If you give it the sense of if you give it the ritualistic sense, then it would, in a sense, lose its importance in the modern world where people are in a real shortage of time. And there are so many rituals and all. Now, if you give it this deeper psycho-spiritual sense, one can see how it becomes very meaningful for each of us in our own lives. The beauty of the Vedic revelations is that these realizations have already been attained by the Vedic rishis in a certain realm. It is a matter of realizing those victories in our life, in our own personal ways, individual lives. So as long as this battle is going on in mankind, the Vedas are bound to continue. And finally, the battle, the sacrifice, and the journey will go on. Thank you. Shubhamastu.
So I would now like to ask the panelists to take their seats and begin some questions. Thank you for the great presentation.
Is this on? Yes. So also, just as a reminder, you can ask any questions that you want, and we're happy to read those in along with us. Also, so several questions.
Great.
If I may have the honor of starting. First of all, thank you very much for presenting. I think it's extremely courageous and kind of you to try to help re-energize knowledge of the Vedas. and to bring a different kind of interpretation. So I'm going to ask,